Hi, this is Harris Dvores, and I'd like to welcome you to the third of 3 videos on how to play the game Space Chess. In today's video, we're going to do a walkthrough of an actual game of Space Chess, and I'm going to show you the reasoning of how to figure out the strategy of moving your ships, and then how to resolve the combat situations that arise when pieces come into conflict. So we've started here with a sample opening board. Every opening board can be different. And you'll see that the silver fleet is set up in the first 2 rows at the bottom of the board, with all of the ships facing the field of combat, and all of the gold fleet is likewise lined up in the top 2 rows, and it's also in a position to move forward. On the left-hand side of the board, we have the fleet strength pads, and they're set up in the traditional starting amounts. Now, normally we would also have the fleet orders pad for each player visible to that player. I'm omitting that step for purposes of this video. If you were playing an actual game, you would give your individual ships orders so that they could all move simultaneously. Here I'm going to walk you through each ship's movement, and then I'll simultaneously move all of them on the board, as well as move the pieces for the gold fleet. So we're going to start out by taking a look at the rook's movement on the silver fleet. I've marked for you here all of the different spaces on the board that the silver rook can move. You'll first notice that it can move to any of the sectors in its own quadrant. So those are 9 possible moves, including staying where it is. Next, it can move one sector in any direction to an adjacent quadrant, and so it could move northwest, north, or northeast 1 sector. Finally, it can jump in a northerly direction, either 2 or 3 quadrants, and you'll see the spaces that are marked there. So those are the possible legal moves for the rook. We can easily rule out about half of the moves. It's not going to move backwards, nor is it going to move to the left edge of the board. So it's pretty much either going to stay where it is, so it's positioned to jump next turn, or it could move to the northeast sector of the 3 quadrant, and thereby be positioned next turn to jump in a northeasterly direction, 2 or 3 quadrants. It could jump 2 or 3 quadrants this turn, but there are other pieces I'd rather move. So I'm going to move the rook to the southeast sector of the 2 quadrant immediately above it, and that way advance the rook without using up the jump ability. Next, we have the knight. And the knight moves in that L-shaped pattern that is either 2 quadrants up or down and then 1 to the left and right, or 2 to the right or left and then 1 up or down. So there are several possible places the knight can move. The most obvious choices are north 2 and then 1 to the right, or north 2 and 1 to the left. Now I can immediately see that if I move the knight 2 north and then east 1, that the queen, the gold queen, is going to be able to jump south, and so that it's lined up directly with my knight. And that's an unacceptable position for my knight to be put in the very first turn. So I'm going to advance it 2 and move to the left because there's no piece that can directly threaten it there. Next, the bishop can either move within its quadrant, but there really aren't any great places for me to move. I think I'm going to advance it 1 into the southwest sector of the 3 quadrant and get it into the action by moving it forward into the next quadrant. Now the queen is much more of a candidate to jump. What I want to show you here is that I really can't jump 3 without putting my queen in peril. And again, this is the analysis that you want to go through every time you're thinking about a potential move for a piece. Is there an obvious way in which your opponent can put you in a position where it can fire on you and your ship cannot fire back? Here, if the gold queen were to move to the southeast sector of its quadrant, it would be diagonally lined up with the sector, the southeast sector in the one quadrant that I'd be jumping to. Now, the reason that's objectionable, since they're both queens and both could fire on diagonals, is that the gold queen can attack the silver queen, but the silver queen cannot attack back. And that's not a position I'd want my queen to be in. So I'm going to move my queen one sector northwest into the same quadrant as the bishop, and we'll see if we can aggregate our forces, that perhaps we can gain some advantages there. That frees up my pawn to jump 3, and this is really the move that I've been saving the jump for. It's rare that you can move a pawn this far without any risk, and in this particular situation, I can jump ahead 3 quadrants to the south sector of the one quadrant. That's more than halfway across the board, and there isn't any risk to doing so. So that's the move I'm going to make. Now let me show you what the board will look like with all of the silver pieces moved and all of the gold pieces moved. So here we have all of the pieces on the board moving simultaneously. And you'll notice that even though we're just one turn into the game, there are already a number of pieces that are in combat proximity. All of the pieces have moved simultaneously, and now all of them are going to be able to fire simultaneously at any ships that come within their range. So what I'm going to do on the next screen is I'm going to diagram out for you each of the potential conflicts that arise after turn 1. As you can see, there are quite a few conflicts that have arisen. What I've done is I've diagrammed out for you each of the potential gold fleet attacks with a gold arrow, and each of the silver fleet attacks with a silver arrow. So let's work them through together. The first one, as you can see on the left, is the gold queen can attack the silver rook. This is because queens can fire diagonally. You'll notice the rook cannot strike back because it only attacks vertically and horizontally. How much is the damage? The starting strength of a queen is 18. And then we divide that by the distance between the two ships, which is 8. 18 divided by 8 is roughly 2. It rounds to 2. And so the silver rook is going to take 2 points of damage, which we'll mark in just a moment. The gold queen gets to recoup 1 point of damage. All ships other than knights are firing energy draining beams, and so they can recoup points based on the amount of damage they do divided by the type of quadrant that they're in. Here, the queen did 2 points of damage, and it is in a 3 quadrant, so 2 divided by 3 rounds to 1. So the gold queen will be rewarded for its successful attack by gaining 1 point of energy. Next, the gold knight can attack a piece in any sector of a quadrant that it could move to next turn. And there is one place that it could attack, and that is the silver knight. Now, knights do not attack the same way as any other piece in the game. A knight does not fire an energy draining beam, but simply does 2 points of damage with each successful attack. Knights never recoup any energy, and so the net result of this exchange is that the gold knight is going to do 2 points of damage to the silver knight. Let's go back the other way. The silver bishop is going to attack the gold pawn. This is actually the longest attack possible in the game of space chess. They are 11 sectors distant. But if you measure out the quadrants, it's 1, 2, 3 quadrants is the distance. And so that bishop can attack the pawn. The pawn can attack back, except it's only in a 2 quadrant. So it could attack on a forward diagonal, but the pawn cannot shoot more than 2 quadrants away. So this is a one-way exchange. However, the damage inflicted by the silver bishop is minimal because it's 12 units of energy divided by 11 units of distance. So the bishop is not going to recover any points. The gold pawn is going to take 1 point of damage, and the silver bishop is only going to collect 1/3 since it's a 3 quadrant, which rounds to 0. Finally, the silver knight can attack either the gold queen or the gold knight. I can tell you that in virtually all situations, the piece you're going to want to damage the most, other than the enemy king, is the enemy queen. So here the silver knight chooses its target and will attack the gold queen and inflict exactly 2 points of damage and not recouping any because it is a knight and knights don't recoup damage. So those are all of the conflicts diagrammed out for you on the very first turn of the game. So let's see what the fleet strength pads look like after turn 1. The gold queen has had a net reduction of 1 point of energy. If you recall, the gold queen gained 1 point by recouping damage from its attack on the silver rook, but it also lost 2 points when it was attacked by the silver knight. The net result is that the queen lost 1 unit of energy, and that's recorded here. The pawn lost 1 point of energy from the attack by the silver bishop, and that's reflected here. All other pieces were unchanged. Now let's go to the silver side. Here, the silver rook has lost 2 points of energy, as has the silver knight. No other piece has had its energy changed. And that's the end of the first turn. Let's now take a look at what the pieces are going to do to start the next round. The silver rook is not in a position to be able to jump, and at this point it really needs to move forward, either into the quadrant to the right, or just it could move to the northeast sector of its present quadrant and be able to jump next turn. And I think that's where I'll move it, is the northeast sector of its present quadrant. The knight is in a good position. The knight is inflicting damage on the gold queen, and if the gold queen centers, which is a very real possibility, then the knight being in that position is really the ideal position it could be in. So that's very tempting to stay there. Also, as I look at potential opportunities to advance, if I were to move the silver knight north 2 and then east 1 quadrant, I would find myself directly in the line of fire with the gold bishop, and that's very concerning. Similarly, if the knight went north 2 and then west 1 into the 3 quadrant, the bishop could still attack it if it's centered in that quadrant. So I'm really not comfortable moving forward 2 and then to the side 1. So I think I'm going to stay here in this space because that's really the optimal position for the silver knight. The silver bishop needs to advance, and it wants to advance somewhere that it can jump next turn. I certainly don't want to center the silver bishop because there's nothing that is exciting that would be in its sights, and if you center, you lose some maneuvering ability for next turn. So I think I'm just going to move the silver bishop forward 2 sectors into the northwest sector of its present quadrant. Now the queen is in a good position to center. Wherever the gold queen goes, except for jumping backwards, I'm going to be able to hit that gold queen. So that's a good position to be in. I'm going to center my silver queen. Lastly, the silver pawn is in a 1 quadrant, so I don't want to necessarily advance anywhere in there because I won't be able to jump. I actually like moving the silver pawn back 1 sector to the 3 quadrants so that it can jump next turn. And my choices are it could move to the northwest sector of that 3 quadrant and then be in a position to jump in a northwestern direction. Or I could move it south 1 sector to the north sector of the 3 quadrant, and then I could jump either 2 or 3 quadrants in a north direction. I think that presents my pawn with the least risk of danger, so I'm going to move that pawn back south 1 sector. And let's go ahead and see what those moves look like on the board. So here are all the moves after turn 2. And you'll see that the conflict is even more advanced. There aren't too many combats this turn because part of the strategy in space chess is to avoid combat where you're going to be disadvantaged. Let's run through the attacks for turn 2. The gold queen is 4 distant from the silver bishop, and it attacks with 17 strength, doing a total of 4 points of damage. It will recoup 1 point since it is in a 3 quadrant, so 4 damage divided by 3 of the number of the quadrant yields 1 point of energy that the queen will get back. The gold knight has a choice of 2 targets. It could either attack the queen or the bishop. It will choose the queen since it is the stronger of the 2 targets, and it's going to do 2 points of damage to the queen. Switching now to the silver side, the silver queen can attack the gold queen, even though the gold queen couldn't attack back, since the gold queen is not centered, but the silver queen is. Remember, when you are centered, you fire along lines. The silver queen also could attack the gold bishop, but it would do less damage since it's further away. So it's going to attack the gold queen and do 4 points of damage. 18 divided by 5 rounds to 4. And then the silver queen will recoup 1 point of damage. The silver bishop has a long attack against the gold rook, and it's going to do 1 point of damage. The silver knight can attack the gold queen, and it will do 2 points of damage. It also could attack the gold bishop, but again, it would choose the stronger target. So that's it for turn 2 attacks. Now let's take a look at the results of the turn 2 attacks when it comes to fleet energy. So we see that the big loser is the gold fleet queen, which has gone from 17 all the way down to 12. This is the result of taking hits from the silver queen and the silver knight for a total of 6 points of damage, but the gold queen recouping 1 point from its attack on the silver queen. Also on the gold side, we see that the gold rook lost 1 point of energy. Turning now to the silver fleet, the silver queen had a net loss of 1, losing 2 to the knight attack, but then gaining 1 from its attack on the other queen. The silver bishop was the big loser on this side, going from 12 to 8 units of energy. And that's it for round 2 combat. Now let's turn to the moves for turn 3. We're getting to the point in the game where taking some additional risk becomes almost inevitable. There are several pieces that the silver fleet can jump this turn. If the silver fleet jumps its rook, then it runs into the danger that it could be hit by both the gold queen and the gold bishop if the gold bishop simply moves left 1 sector. So that jump is undesirable. The silver bishop can either jump 2 or 3. If it jumps 2, there is the danger that the gold queen could stay where it is or move 1 to the east and be in a 1 quadrant and really recoup a lot of its energy from that attack on the bishop. Or the gold queen could jump 2 and then the bishop would be at peril as well. So jumping 2 presents some problems, but jumping 3 is even more dangerous. If the silver bishop jumps 3, then it is looking at potentially catastrophic damage from the gold rook, which could anticipate the move and move just one square, either vertical or horizontal from it within that 2 quadrant. So the bishop jump has significant risk associated with it. Likewise, if the silver pawn jumps 2, there's the risk that the gold rook could anticipate that and move to the southeast sector of its quadrant, so it would be just 2 away and inflict major damage on the pawn. If the pawn jumped 3, the rook could move back 1 sector, either into the 1 quadrant and then recoup 100% of the damage, or it could move into the 3 quadrant and not recoup as much, but still be able to destroy the pawn. So the pawn jumping really is an unacceptably high risk. I'm going to choose here to jump the bishop 2. The risk of doing so is that the gold queen will attack me, but I think it's more likely here that the gold queen will choose to jump. And even if the gold queen jumps 2, by my moving my queen where I'm going to, I'll be able to hedge my bets and in all likelihood have my queen attacked instead of the bishop. So for all those reasons, I'm going to jump my bishop 2. I'm going to move my queen into the north sector of its present quadrant. If my queen stays there, there's the danger that the gold knight could do a kamikaze attack and move directly into the sector that my queen is in. And that would result in a collision doing a tremendous amount of damage, 12 points of damage to the queen, which would not destroy the queen, but it would render it a greatly weakened piece. I don't want to take that chance, and so I need to move, and I'd rather move into a sector where I can jump toward the other side's king next turn. Speaking of the gold king, it's time that my knight went ahead and explored further. If I move north 2 quadrants and to the right 1 quadrant, then there is a very high risk of mortal damage from the bishop. The gold bishop could move back 1 into the 1 quadrant where it's moving diagonally, and if it were in the southeast sector of that quadrant, it would be just 1 away. It would do 12 points of damage, destroy the piece, and it would gain, well, it would be limited here to gaining it would go up to 20. It would become even more powerful than the queen. So that's something that we simply can't take a chance on happening. So my silver knight is going to go forward 2 and to the left 1 into the center of the 3 quadrant. Since my rook did not jump, the best I can do is to move it 1 sector northeast into the southwest sector of the 3 quadrant. And lastly, my pawn, since it's not going to jump, I think the best thing to do, I could stay there and just preserve the ability to jump 3, but then I'd run the risk of being in the exact same position next turn. So what I'm going to do is move the silver pawn to the left 1 sector. So I'm in the northwest sector of the existing 3 quadrant. And that will allow me to jump 3 quadrants toward the center of the board, allowing me perhaps to discover the opponent's king, or if I'm really lucky, to be able to queen the pawn. So those are all of the moves for the silver fleet pieces. I should mention here that I am becoming concerned about the gold knight's search options. My king is located in the bottom row, the 5th quadrant from the right. It's in the northwest sector. And I could choose to make my king visible at this point. Why would I do that? There is the danger if the gold knight moves toward me 2 quadrants and then to the left 1, that it would be able to search 6 quadrants, including the one my king is in. I believe it is unlikely that the knight will move there because it faces a significant threat from both the silver queen and the silver bishop. So that's just 2 great a risk of substantial loss. So I think it's more likely that the gold knight is going to move down 2, but then over 1 to the right into that 2 quadrant. And for that reason, I'm going to choose not to become visible this turn, since I feel that I have in all likelihood one more turn before my king is going to be discovered, and I hate to make it visible if I'm not going to gain any points from it. So let's see how all the pieces move for turn 3. The two fleets are now well intermingled, and the gold queen, while it's going to take some damage, has moved perilously close to where my king is located. The gold knight did go where I anticipated, so I'm glad I did not cause my king to be visible. I'm going to have to make a choice what to do with my silver knight, whether to search 2 quadrants or to attack. So let's take a closer look at the possible combat and search moves for this turn. I've diagrammed out for you all of the potential conflicts for this turn, and I've illustrated also the search ranges of the knights on both sides so that we can explore how that works. Let's start with the gold queen attack. It's lined up horizontally with the silver queen, and it is a damage of 2 points because it's 12 units of strength divided by 5 sectors distance equals 2, and then it's going to recoup 1 point since it's 2 divided by the 3 was the number of the quadrant that it's in. Notice here that there's going to be a reciprocal attack from the silver queen, and we'll get to that in just a moment. The gold bishop is able to attack the silver rook. It has 12 units of strength, and it is 5 sectors distant, so that's going to round down to 2. The bishop will be able to recover 1 point of energy since it's in a 2 quadrant. The rook will take 2 points of damage, the silver rook. The gold knight has a choice here. It could attack the silver pawn and inflict 2 points of damage, but the power to be able to search 3/8 of the entire hiding spaces for my king is simply too great a temptation. So it is going to forego the attack and instead search through those 6 quadrants. If my king were anywhere in those 6 quadrants, it would need to reveal itself. However, it is not, so nothing comes of the search. Now let's turn to the silver fleet. The silver queen is striking back against the gold queen, and because of the big damage differential last turn, it's going to be able to hit harder. Here it has 17 units of energy divided by that same 5 sector difference, and we see that rounds to 3 points of damage, and it is going to recover 1 point of energy from that attack. The silver knight has a choice. It can search just 2 quadrants. Again, the king always has to be in the 2 rows of quadrants that are closest to a player. And that's not such a powerful search. I'll be able to get at least one of those, maybe both, depending where I jump next turn. So I think I'm going to forego that search, and instead I'm going to strike at the gold bishop, inflicting 2 points of damage. So let's take a look at what the energy levels are following this attack. Now, before we go through the actual energy calculations, I'd like to point out that the gold queen had another potential target. It could have shot the silver bishop, but the reason I chose to shoot the queen is that the queen is the strongest piece on the board, and even though I'm only inflicting 2 units of damage on the queen, and I could have inflicted 3 on the bishop, I would choose here to attack the queen to avoid it becoming too strong and able to overwhelm whatever defenses my king and related forces can hope to muster. Turning now to the results of the battle, we can see that the silver queen is a 16. The silver bishop is at an 8. So it has been greatly weakened. Also, the rook, silver rook, is greatly weakened. The knight has sustained a small amount of damage. The king and the pawn are unaffected. Turning now to the gold fleet, we see that the gold queen is down to 10. This is probably the most important thing that's happened so far in the game, is that the gold queen is not at the level of queen strength, but it's more like the level of the other pieces, the bishop, rook, and knight. So that is a serious problem for the gold fleet, and one it's going to have to overcome in the coming turns. Now let's take a look at the silver fleet moves for turn 4. The first decision that I'm looking at is where to move the knight. I really have only two possible spaces to consider: moving ahead 2 toward the edge of the board and then to the right 1, or moving ahead 1 and then crossing over 2 to the right. Those two quadrants would both allow me significant searching privileges. I'd be able to search 6 quadrants. There's a danger in moving so close to a 1 quadrant. The king could surface, anticipating my move. I think what I'm going to do is move my knight into the 1 quadrant and take my chances. Now my rook is not in a position to jump this turn, and there is a very real danger that the gold bishop will center. And if I go anywhere in that 3 quadrant that I'm in right now, it's going to get another shot. And my rook is getting significantly degraded in its strength. It's down to 8. What I'm going to do with the rook here is actually going to be significantly affected by another move that I'm making. If I move my queen northeasterly 1 sector, so I'm in the 2 quadrant that's to the north above my queen right now, in the southeast sector, I would then be lined up with the bishop. And even if the bishop could attack my rook, I believe it would attack my queen because it presents a more choice target. So I'm going to be able to hedge my bets and move my rook where I'd like to, despite the risk, because my queen is going to cut off the primary danger to the rook. Actually, just the threat that my queen will move there will probably be enough to deter the gold player from moving the bishop into the center sector. And that frees up my queen to do something else which I'd like to accomplish this turn, and that is to take out the gold queen as an effective fighting piece. If I center in this quadrant and the queen moves anywhere in its quadrant or into the 1 quadrant next to me, then I'm going to be able to significantly reduce its energy. And I'm going to take a chance and go for that move instead. Now the silver bishop needs to be able to get into play to go after the king. And I don't know where the king is yet. I could either move into the north sector of this quadrant or the northwest and position myself to jump next turn. I'm going to move to the northwest sector because there is a danger that the gold rook will anticipate my intentions and move 1 quadrant south, and so it will be in the north or the northwest sector, and it would be aligned with my bishop horizontally. The pawn move is really the easiest move. I've set myself up so that I can jump the silver pawn 3, and that is going to put me in an excellent position with really very little threat of harm. Now, the biggest decision that I need to make this turn is whether or not to uncover my king. There is a very real possibility that the knight is going to jump into the quadrant that I'm located. If that happens, then I will be 1 sector away and I'll be able to inflict serious damage. Well, there are 2 major events that occurred this turn. One is that the gold king surfaced. It decloaked and can attack the silver knight, inflicting serious damage, 3 points of damage, but more importantly is that the king is going to recoup all 3 points, which is a 50% increase in its strength. That's a major event in the game. The good news for the Silver Fleet is that the Silver King made the right decision to not decloak, because it would have gained nothing. It would have simply surfaced and there would be no advantage. So that was the right decision, but the Silver Fleet faces some uphill challenges this turn as it tries to mobilize its forces and get closer to where the Gold King was suspected to be. So let's take a look at the other attacks. The Gold Rook is attacking the Silver Bishop. It's doing significant damage, 4 points of damage, and is recouping 2 points since it is a 2-quadrant. The Gold Knight, having elected to move back, is going to damage the Silver Queen. And that is a big decision for this turn, was that the Silver Queen centered to give it just a huge opportunity to attack other pieces since it's going to fire on quadrant lines. But Gold anticipated this move successfully, and therefore the Silver Queen cannot attack, and it will indeed take 2 points of damage from the Gold Knight. Now, the Silver Knight's intended search of 6 quadrants is unnecessary, because the Gold King has surfaced. Once a king becomes visible, it is visible for the rest of the game. So now let's take a look at how all of these battles affected the ship energy. We see that the Silver Queen has been weakened down to a 14, which is a significant loss, and the Bishop is down to a 4, as well as the 8 Rook, the 8 Knight. All of the Silver Fleet at this point has been significantly weakened from its starting strength, with the exception of the pawn, which has successfully jumped to where it can be useful either as a fighting piece, or it could make an effort to queen the pawn, and we'll be discussing that when we consider moves. The Gold Fleet suffers from a weak queen who is at a 10 strength, but its other pieces are quite healthy. The Bishop is at 11. The Rook is actually increased from its starting value and is at 13. Only the pawn has been weakened a little bit. Most importantly, the Gold King is up to 9. And at this point in the game, it looks like Gold has taken a healthy lead, but there's still plenty of surprises yet in store for our players. The Silver Fleet to start turn 5 has one overriding goal, and that is to converge its forces as quickly as possible on the Gold King. The only piece that makes sense to jump here is the Silver Rook, because it still has enough strength to be able to compete with the Gold King, whereas the Silver Bishop, which could otherwise jump right into that theater, is just not able to do enough damage and is too vulnerable to attack. So we're going to jump the Rook 3. The Knight needs to move away from the King to where it's not in as much danger of being attacked. And I'm probably going to move it back 1 and over 2 to the right. The other possible location is over to the right 1 and down 2, but I think it's better in terms of being able to attack the King to move to the right 2 and down 1. Now the Silver Pawn is an interesting choice. The most obvious move would be to go forward 2 and either left 1 or left 2 or just simply straight and be in the northernmost row of the 2 quadrant that the pawn is in. And that will get it to advance even closer to be able to become a queen. However, it's very likely that the Gold King is going to anticipate that and will move to the quadrant immediately to the left of the pawns so that it would be lined up horizontally with the pawn and be able to inflict damage. So I have a surprise move here. I'm going to move the pawn back one into the northeast sector of the 3 quadrant. And that will allow me to jump away from the king and still get me in the same time frame to where I can queen my pawn safely. So that's starting to look pretty good. The other option is that the silver pawn is at full strength and is not by itself a match for the king, but if I could align several pieces in one attack and coordinate them, it might be worth using it as a fighting piece. But that's unlikely to happen just yet. I need to get the rook and the queen there first, and that's going to take a few turns to materialize. Next, we have the queen, and the queen needs to simply get out of that trapped position that unfortunately it's in right now, where it cannot leave that quadrant. So it is a sitting duck for the gold knight and obviously has to move. Now that I know the location of the gold king, it's a pretty obvious move. I'm going to move into the north sector of this quadrant so that I can jump 3 quadrants and be close to the opponent's king next turn. Lastly is the bishop. The bishop really needs to get a good turn here. It needs to try and recoup some damage. The only way that it can inflict any significant damage at this point is at point blank range. So let's take a look at what the gold rook might be doing this turn. Since it's obvious that the silver rook is the best piece to jump this turn, the gold player will be able to anticipate that the bishop is simply going to move forward somewhere. And if it moves forward 1, then the best play for the rook is to just simply move back 1, and it will be able to strike and hit the bishop again. Another alternative is it could jump 2 and follow after that pawn. So that's a possible move as well. But I think what I'd like to do is destroy the silver bishop, even as I move my other pieces forward as the gold player. So let's see how this all materializes when both sides have made their moves. Unfortunately, the gold knight did not stay to inflict another 2 points of damage on my queen, but instead is going to discover my king this turn. On the other hand, I've now successfully, as the silver player, moved my rook to where it's becoming relevant. And most importantly is that the bishop is beautifully lined up to attack the gold rook. So let's take a closer look at those conflicts. So we see here that the gold king is in a position to be able to attack the silver knight. Now that its strength is up to 9, it can inflict more than 1 point of damage even at distance. So it's doing 2 points of damage to the knight, and the king will recoup 1 since it's in a 2 quadrant. The gold bishop is able to attack the silver rook, and again, it's a powerful piece. So it can do 3 points damage even when 4 away. So it's going to recoup 1 point. When you have a half, it's going to round down. Next, we see that the gold knight is searching 6 quadrants, and though the silver king did not voluntarily decloak, it has now been discovered. If the gold queen were lined up with the silver king, it could not attack this turn because the searching comes after the attacks, and so the king would not be visible until afterwards. The silver queen has a long range attack on the pawn, and it's going to do 2 points of damage and recoup 1. The silver bishop has its finest hour and will do 4 points of damage to the gold rook, and unfortunately only recoup 1. But now it's cut down that rook to where it's no longer overpowering in strength. Finally, the silver knight is going to be able to attack the gold bishop and do 2 points of damage to it. So this was a fairly major turn. At this point, we are well into the middle game because both kings have become visible, and we are rapidly approaching the end game because now it's a question of which side can mobilize its forces more quickly, and then we'll enter the end game where you're trying to corner your opponent's king. So let's take a quick look now at the energy calculations before we do the moves for turn 6. The gold player's forces are a little bit weaker. Most significant is the gold rook. The gold bishop is a little bit weaker. The gold pawn is now down to just 3. Now I should mention that unless you're using your pawn as a fighting piece, it makes no difference whether it queens at a 1 or at some other number. Now that both kings are visible, the overriding objective for the rest of the game is to bring all possible forces to bear on your opponent's king to muster sufficient energy to be able to destroy it. And so that's going to be reflected both in the offensive and defensive moves that we consider in turn 6. There are several pieces that can jump here, but really only one that is worthy of serious consideration, and that is the queen has to jump 3. There is no choice because it is the only remaining piece in Silver's fleet that is capable of destroying the king. The others have been so weakened by the clashes that have occurred over these past 5 turns that they simply are not up to the task without the queen. So the queen is going to jump. It could jump 2 or jump 3. I think it's going to jump 3 and try to get there a little bit faster. The pawn could have jumped, but we're going to go ahead and instead just move the pawn forward 1, moving conventionally so that we get it to the place where it could queen. If we weren't in such a dire circumstance with our king having been exposed, then I might consider jumping the pawn here because it would be nice to just be a couple of turns away from getting a second queen, but we don't have the luxury of time. Now the bishop is in a dilemma. When the gold rook centers, as I expect it to, there is no escape. Wherever the bishop goes, it's going to be hit by the rook. Its best move is to take out as many points as it can from the gold rook. And so I'm going to move into the space that the rook presently occupies with the intention of being able to strike it point blank and do a lot of damage before I'm destroyed. The rook move at the top of the board, I'm assuming that the king is going to move away from where the queen is jumping. The gold player is no slouch. He knows that I'm going to jump, and so I assume the king is going to be moving away. I want to bring my rook to where I can attack the king, and of course, bishops can attack diagonally, rooks cannot. So it is important that my rook advance to where it's adjacent to that top row of quadrants so that it can attack the king. But wherever I go to, if you look at any of the 3 sectors, northwest, north, or northeast, wherever I go, there is a corresponding place that the gold king could go to fire on me. So I'm going to choose to move to the northwest sector of this quadrant just so that if I am attacked by the gold king, it'll be the longest possible distance, and hopefully that will minimize the damage. Then the knight is a very difficult move here. I like the knight being in this location because it covers both of the 1 quadrants that are adjacent to where the gold king is right now. And so for that reason, I'm tempted to stay there. And there's no good place for me to jump. If I jump to either one of those 1 quadrants, I run the risk of being attacked at point blank range. And there is no place the gold king could move to where I'd be able to attack it. So it's taking a large risk with absolutely no chance of reward. I could jump back to the quadrant where the bishop is, but again, I'm risking point blank damage, and there's no significant benefit from it. So I'm going to keep the knight right where it is for the time being, and that leaves the king. My desire right now is to flee. My king is not the same strength as the gold king. The gold king's a 9. If I were a 9, then I could fight the queen on an even basis, because remember, kingships have greater armor. So that would be a fair fight. The problem here is I'm only a 6. I'm going to lose that exchange. So I have to get out. And being a king, I can't jump. So my best play here is to move to the 2 quadrant, the southeast sector, because that gives me the most number of places that I can try to escape to in the next turn. We do have a couple of battles this turn, one of which is especially interesting. The gold rook is locked in mortal combat with the silver bishop. And we're going to see a piece destroyed here because the gold rook will attack with 9 points of damage against the silver bishop that only has 5 strength. So the silver bishop is destroyed. However, as intended, it exacts the maximum price that it could for its loss by doing 5 points of damage to the rook. The net to the rook will be a loss of 3 points since it loses 5 and gains 2. That's probably the best that the silver player could do with this situation because the rook was in such a powerful position. The knights damage each other 2 points. That's just a minor skirmish. We see that the gold bishop will do 2 points of damage against the silver pawn. The silver pawn cannot attack back because pawns only attack on forward diagonals. That's it for the battles for this turn. Now let's take a look at the fleet energy pads. We see that there are no changes to kings or queens, but that the silver bishop has been destroyed. The silver knight is even weaker. The silver pawn is weaker as well. The gold knight has gone down too. The gold rook has been seriously degraded in strength. It's now just a 6 thanks to the heroic sacrifice of the bishop. And the gold bishop has gone up 1. So no major changes in this turn, really, other than the loss of the silver bishop. Silver player is about to lose because gold has made an excellent move. It moved its queen backwards instead of to the row at the bottom of the 1 quadrant. It made a brilliant play and now is in a position to jump to where it is extremely close to my king. And I fear that the end is near. Now let me just show you also why this is such a good move. If the queen had made the obvious move and had moved, let's say, to the southwest sector of the 1 quadrant it was in, then the silver king would have had an attack on the gold queen, and the gold queen could not attack back. That's the best, really, that the silver king can hope for in this exchange. Unfortunately, the gold move is not checkmate next turn, but it is going to lead to the quick end of the game, because when the queen jumps to, the best the silver king can do is to move to the either the northwest or the southwest sectors of that 2 quadrant. And very quickly it's going to be in a position where the queen is going to be able to center and inflict serious damage on the king. In addition, the other gold pieces are going to be able to quickly come to bear. Unfortunately, it's going to take a number of turns before the silver queen can get to where the gold king is. And so I'll leave you to play out this game and get a little bit of practice in seeing how that works. Hopefully this video has shown you how to think through your moves as you plan them, and then how to resolve the various conflicts that arise once all the ships move on the board. I look forward to hearing back from you as to your actual experiences with space chess.